So far in the last lesson, we were able to output the content and send it over to a function called output planets. So we're ready to add content and make it visible within the page and loop through all of the content that's available within this array object. And this is being returned back from planets, remember, and then we're sending it over. So we need to make that connection to output planets to actually send the planet information. So this is our newly constructed array where we're using map, where we reconstructed it, and we're only returning the name and films. So when we do press me, you can see that this is the information that's being contained. So we want to loop through this, iterate through it, and output it on the page. And we can do that using the for each. So this is another array prototype, and this is the array prototype for each, and what it does is it allows you to loop through each one of the provided elements of a function and output their contents. So really relatively straightforward. I can copy and paste that, and I can do a quick demo of how that's going to work. So when we paste that in here and we refresh, we see we get A, B, C, and we want to do the same thing for the content that's being passed in, so for the content of the data. So going down to the function where we've got output planets, let's do data and then for each, and then looping through for each. Just as we saw in the example, we've got an anonymous function, and then the element is representing that item that's in the data. So we can do function, and I can call it item, you could call it element as well, or item. And then now we're console log out and console log out each one of those items. So kind of the same thing that we did for map. And there's a reason that we could have obviously done it here while we're mapping it out and looping through it, and we could have saved ourselves maybe some trouble with the map. But there is a reason to do this, and this is providing more flexibility and more dynamic capabilities with the content. So now when I press the press me, you're going to see that it outputs all of that newly freshly created values, and we go to next, and we can see all of the next planets as well. I'm going to comment this one out, and it's going to be more for the dynamic capability when we want to loop through all of the planets, so all the 61 planets across the 7 pages, and then output them as one chunk on the planet. So this is going to make a whole lot more sense. And obviously that is more to come in the upcoming lessons, and I'll show you how to do that. So for now, as we loop through each one of the items, you can see we've got a name and we've got the URLs. So how about we create some elements using JavaScript? So const, and in this case, we're going to create a div. So the div is going to be the main holder, and then we're going to add that into the output area. And then underneath the div, we can have a list item of the URLs if we want as well. So the div that we're creating is using document, create element, and the element that we're creating is going to be a div. And then within the div, we're going to have text content. And the content inside of the div is going to be just the name of the planet. So we've got item name. And then also what we want to do is we've got an array within that array. So we can create another loop. And in this case, this one has actually 4 films. So we want to loop through the number of films. I'm going to do a regular for loop. So for x equals 0, and while x is less than films. So this is in case we don't have anything in there. I usually prefer to do the for loops within that. So instead of films, it should be item films. Films. So the object is whatever we've specified down here, passing in that array object. So looping through and then increment it by 1. And then here is where we're going to add to that element. So add to that div, and we're going to construct some new elements. So we've got an unordered list that we're going to create and using document. I know there's quite a bit of creating, and you could also do it with just the inner HTML as well if you like. So that way you can do that, but this is the more proper way when you're creating the elements using JavaScript. And then, so actually I'm going to put this one outside, and then I'm going to create the elements inside of there. And they're going to just get attached to the unordered list. So we'll create some list items, and I'll use let for this one. Document, create element again, and in this case we're creating list item. And then within the list item, the text content of the list item is going to be equal to item, and this one is going to be a little bit longer, so item films. And so this is going to have more information of the films. And this is right now just a URL, but that's fine. We can just use that. And of course, you can structure it as needed. So item films. So it's going to output the URL. And then we're taking the unordered list, append child to that, and we can then add in the list item. And that will add in all of the list items. And then we need to take the unordered list and append it to the div. So append child and unordered list. And then lastly, let's take the div and we're going to append it to output. So append child. So I know we're doing quite a bit of appending here, but at the end of the day, it's going to all make sense. So appending the div. And just notice that I'm using items instead of item. And this actually needs to look for a length because this is an array, so it's going to have a length. So I think we're ready to try this. So hit press me. And we list out the name and then the films that they're in. And this is returning back to the API. So you can customize this a little bit further if you wanted to. But in this case, we're able to see all of the films and information about the films and so on, and have them listed out for each one of the planets. So we do still have those 61 results that were found. And I'm going to show you another way to pull that information back and then utilize it within your API so that we can actually loop through all the results and then output them on our page. So sometimes you might want to do that when you have an API and you have these next pages. You want to have that all within one array and then make use of it. So that's what I'm going to be showing you in the upcoming lesson. So go ahead and add this into your project where you're outputting the planets and make them visible for the user so they can see the planet name and then the URLs or the additional films. So go ahead, try this within your own project, add the ability to output them. And coming up next, we're going to loop through all of the values, all of the results that are found and place them within one big array and then output the planet information. So that's still to come.